This is the rest of the story, the United States and Japan. U.S. relationship with Japan goes back to the mid-1800s, when the U.S. was becoming a commercial and industrial empire, and it needed to find markets for its goods. In order to do that, the United States needed to acquire the port of San Francisco as a gateway to Asia. And it went to war with Mexico to get this port of San Francisco. This is an empire, of course. It involved taking, as we mentioned in class, 1/3 to 1/2 of Mexico. The United States acquires this port, and then Commodore Perry goes to Japan with a fleet and forces the Japanese to open their door to American goods. So the link between the United States and Japan goes back to the mid-1800s. Later, half a century later, the United States goes to war with Spain. A made-up excuse. Something happens in Cuba, and the U.S. Goes to war with Spain in order to take, along with some Caribbean islands, to take the Philippines, in order to compete with other European countries that have colonies in Asia. And so the United States is now a world player. This takes place in part because China is disunited in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and is vulnerable to different empires chipping away at its side. The empire that's going to grab a good bit of China is Japan. Japan becomes an industrialized nation. It needs raw materials, and it moves into good parts of China in search of raw materials that it needs in order for it to become the industrial power it sees itself to become. Japan needs oil and iron and steel, and the U.S. threatens Japan that it's going to cut off those products. Japan panics. The military in Japan panic. They're the ones in command. Remember, the emperor is the titular head of the nation. In any case, Japan attacks the United States in 1941. And the United States enters World War II. The main goal for the United States at first is Europe, but in time it addresses goes back to address the Japanese expansion in the Pacific, and in the process suffers approximately 100,000 casualties in this war in the Pacific. With the development of the atomic bomb over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrenders, and the war is over. But Communist China looms in the background, and so the United States is going to take over, occupy Japan, and it wants to rebuild Japan because it fears the power of the now united China, and the policy is containment of communism. To rebuild Japan, the United States allows the Japanese emperor to continue to rule. It does away, of course, with the military, which is a long tradition in Japan that we talked about in class. And it gets concessions for military bases in Japan, because this is the American foothold in Asia. in this new rebuilt Japan, it industrializes. It borrows at first technology from the United States, as it had been borrowing from China before. But then it takes off on its own and creates this new industrial power with the latest technology, makes huge profits, and lends money to the United States. And they live happily ever after. Thank you for your attention.